Well, welcome everybody. It's great to see you. Thank you for coming. We appreciate it. We also appreciate your steady and loyal support of the School for Advanced Research. At this event, the goal, well, we have several goals, but basically just want to share with you a virtual tour of our campus that we developed during the shutdown in lieu of actual campus visits. It lasts about 20 minutes and has some historic photographs as well as contemporary ones. And we also want to give you a sense of how you can make a difference through your continued support of SAR. Our guests, Diane and Russ Kyncl, will share their story about how they became acquainted with SAR and why they decided to include it in their estate plans, and we're grateful for that. And our financial expert, Dan Merians, also a loyal supporter of SAR, will talk about some things to consider when planning your estate, how to stay true to your values, and in ways that may benefit you and your heirs. Some of you know one of the things we did during COVID was to undertake a fairly massive renovation or updating of parts of the campus. The entire campus has been replastered. We've done masonry work, we've done roofs, which are boring but important, and some interior work. And so the sad thing was the campus is completely restored, but it's still only lightly populated by human beings. But we will do that. We will move forward with that very soon. And that work was done thanks to a number of major donors, as well as most members of our board and a few others. And so I look forward to giving you a chance when you come to campus to see what we've been able to accomplish. There's always more to do on a 100-year-old campus, and I have some improvements I'd like to institute, including sprucing up our Garcia Street frontage, which is a little rough and ready. Not inconsistent with Santa Fe in general, but I think we can do a better job with that, and we'll be working on that in the coming month. I'm hopeful. So one way that you could help us, and yourself too, as you'll hear from Dan Merians, is through estate planning that includes SAR. It's how SAR got to be the institution that it is today. When the campus was left to us in 1972, we had almost no endowment. I think when Doug Schwartz came, there was something like $39,000 in the bank. And we're a lot better off today thanks to good management and generous supporters. So let's start with the video, which is just kind of fun. I think it's now up in the website. Some of you may have seen it, but it's always good to be reminded of the incredible history of our campus. Lindsay?
This is Nancy Owen Lewis. I'd like to welcome you to El Delirio, former residence of Amelia Elizabeth and Martha White, and now home to the School for Advanced Research in Santa Fe, New Mexico. Founded in 1907 as the School of American Archaeology, it was originally housed downtown in the Palace of the Governors. Then, in 1973, SAR moved onto an old adobe estate tucked away off Garcia Street on the city's east side. Built in the 1920s by two sisters from New York City, they transformed the property into a wonderland of terraces, archways, and gardens, complete with a swimming pool and tennis courts, the first of their kind in Santa Fe, and an amazing home built in the Spanish Pueblo Revival style. They called it El Delirio, or the Madness, after a bar in Seville, Spain. As Elizabeth explained, the bar was next to a hotel where we had once stayed. While sightseeing, we kept getting lost. When we found El Delirio, we knew we were home. Although SAR has since added new buildings, its 11 historic structures are integral to the campus. Most of them are on this map, made in 1927 by their friend artist Gustav Baumann. On our tour, we'll visit the 14 sites shown on this more recent map, and included will be a few contemporary buildings as well. Standing outside the reception center where our tour begins, you can see 4 small adobe buildings, all part of the original estate, which have since been remodeled into apartments for our resident scholars. The furthest one, today known as the Bandelier Apartment, was the original house on the property. It was purchased by the White sisters in 1923 during a trip to Mount Palomar to view an eclipse of the sun. They stopped in Santa Fe and ended up buying a small adobe house on an 1.5 acres of land on Garcia Street, then on the edge of town. Corn grew in the fields while goats and sheep grazed on the nearby hills. It was a world very different from their childhood home on Manhattan's Upper East Side, where they had lived with their father, Sister Abby, and 4 servants. Their mother died when they were small. Elizabeth had been very taken with Santa Fe during her first trip to New Mexico in 1913 to visit a Bryn Mawr classmate. They joined archaeologists employed at the School of American Archaeology for a hiking trip. The White sisters were both graduates of Bryn Mawr College, which fostered a love of pageantry and reinforced their passion for social reform instilled in them by their father, Horace White, a newspaper publisher and financier. Upon their arrival in Santa Fe, the White sisters quickly became involved in efforts to protect Pueblo land, address Native health, and promote Indian art by organizing shows such as the Exposition of Indian Tribal Arts in New York City. Now in their 40s, they initially viewed El Delirio as a summer home. It would later become their main residence. A few years after purchasing the property, they built 2 adobe guest houses, both in the Spanish Pueblo Revival style, and now known as the Hewitt and Kidder residences, the latter a 2-story apartment. Then, during the 1930s, the White sisters built a guest house in the Territorial Revival style. The Wagner apartment was later remodeled to conform with the others. Its interior, however, remains unique. It includes a New York room, reminiscent of their living room in New York City, complete with a crystal chandelier. The portrait of Martha White, seen in this historic photo, was later installed in the billiard house. During the 1930s, the White sisters also built a stables and estate manager's house across the street. Both are now resident scholar apartments. Going to our second site, we enter through a Spanish wrought iron gate and head down the steps to the offices where our resident scholars write their books and doctoral dissertations. Originally a breezeway connecting their home with the guest houses, Elizabeth White later enclosed the space to make a greenhouse. SAR then transformed it into scholar offices. Heading down the walkway, we come to our next site, the White sisters' impressive Spanish Pueblo Revival-style home built in 1926. To design their home, they hired William Penhallow Henderson, a well-known artist who had recently partnered with 2 other men to form this Pueblo Spanish building company. Constructed of adobe, he modeled it after the Mission Church at Laguna Pueblo, complete with a choir loft where an orchestra could perform. It now serves as the school's administration building. Entering through the door on the left, we head down a hallway. Originally open to the garden, it was later enclosed by Elizabeth White. Continuing down the hall, we come to the White sisters' living room, which they designed to accommodate theatrical performances, concerts, and of course, parties, like this 1949 masquerade ball. Hanging from the ceiling is a 19th century tin chandelier, likely made in Mexico. The elk hide on the wall depicts a buffalo hunt, painted by Shoshone artist Katsikoti, it still graces the room, as shown in this contemporary photograph. Today, the White Sisters' living room is used for board meetings, colloquiums, and other events. The original hand-carved mission-style doors remain, as do their benches, chests, wardrobes, and tables, many of Spanish colonial design. The wall is adorned by paintings by San Ildefonso artists, Awatsira and Okapi. Leaving the boardroom, we continue down the hall, which ends in another corridor containing the former bedrooms of Martha, Elizabeth, and Catherine Rain, Elizabeth's companion. All have been converted into staff offices. Turning left, this corridor ends at a heavy door leading to a stairway. Follow me as we descend into the White Sisters' dining room. The door is framed by a tropical motif of pineapples and birds, traditional Victorian symbols of hospitality. Martha and Elizabeth dined here, enjoying meals prepared in an adjoining kitchen by Gunhilda, their Norwegian cook. Nuke Goxum, her brother, served as butler. The White Sisters also entertained in this room. One of its most impressive features, the altar screen seen here, was given to the White Sisters by their friend archaeologist Sylvanus Morley, who Elizabeth first met in 1913. Morley purchased it from a church in Guatemala, destroyed by an earthquake. At Elizabeth White's request, Gustav Baumann replaced its crucifixion images with angels and lutes. Its color scheme is reflected in the wood ceiling carved by William Penhallow Henderson. This room now serves as the President's office. Immediately upon leaving the administration building, we enter the President's Garden, our fourth site, where you'll see a number of water features, including one with a spiral motif, which today serves as SAR's logo. Reflecting a strong Moorish influence, the garden was laid out shortly after the house was built. The sisters later added this pineapple-shaped marble fountain, an international symbol of hospitality. Today, known as the President's Garden, events are hosted in this patio, which also offers a quiet place to relax. Elizabeth White often sat here with her dogs. Depicted here are Sandy, her Scottish Terrier, and one of her Afghans, which she raised. The garden also offers a view of the estate, as does the nearby Cottonwood Patio, our fifth site. Sheltered beneath a large cottonwood tree, and it's a great place to see the terrace landscaping, or ceremonial corn terraces, as Gustav Baumann called them on his 1927 map. Our next stop, Site 6, includes two historic structures. Heading up the steps, we arrive at the billiard house, built in the early 1940s, but before we enter it, we come to the Mirador, or lookout. Built in the 1920s, it provides an excellent view of El Delirio and also the arroyo, which in the past used to run. Visualizing boats coming up and down the arroyo, former estate manager Jack Lambert called it the boathouse. Entering the billiard house, you can see the original Brunswick table, above which hangs a portrait of Martha White. During World War II, Elizabeth White invited servicemen here to play pool. A fireplace framed by carved columns adds warmth to the room, which today is used as a gathering place by staff and resident fellows whose portraits hang on the wall. Leaving the billiard house, we head down the lilac path to Site 7, the gazebo. On your left, we pass the tennis courts, which were built in the 1920s. At the end of the path, we come to the gazebo, built in memory of Martha, Elizabeth's beloved sister, who died in May 1937 at the age of 56 of cancer. Elizabeth was devastated. In 1939, she donated money in Martha's name for Santa Fe's first animal shelter. In 1949, she hired John Gaumeme to design a memorial gazebo to house Martha's ashes. When completed, it also incorporated a fountain and a bust of Martha. While in her early 20s, Martha had posed for sculptor Francois Tonetti, who had been hired to produce 3 classical images to be installed above the entrances to the New York Public Library. Martha had posed as Athena. Obtaining a plaster cast of the image, Elizabeth had it recast and installed at El Delirio. Today, the windows have been removed from the gazebo, and Martha's ashes are no longer there. Instead, they now reside with her sister, who died in 1972, in a grave beneath the gazebo and near the graves of their beloved dogs, which is the next stop on our virtual tour. The White sisters raised Irish Wolfhounds and Afghans and competed in shows around the country. Some 48 dogs are buried here, including 20 Irish Wolfhounds and 19 Afghans, as well as Sandy, their Scotty, and 8 dogs belonging to friends and staff. Although a lot of champions were buried here, none was as famous as Elizabeth's Afghan Amanullah, who by 1940 had won 9 Best in Shows. Considered the leading Afghan of the time, his portrait currently hangs in SAR's library. SAR's Indian Arts program is reflected in our next 2 sites. In 1997, Ron and Susan Dubin, who had previously funded a fellowship for Native American artists, built an artist studio next to the Indian Arts Research Center. IARC, as it's called, houses an incredible collection of Southwest Indian art. Although a contemporary building, the collection itself has historic roots. The White sisters, in fact, not only contributed to this collection, they were also trustees of the organization that eventually donated it to SAR. Its origins date back to a dinner party hosted in 1922 by Elizabeth Shepley Sargent, a fellow Bryn Mawr graduate, at her home in nearby Tesuque. During the course of the evening, someone broke a Zuni pot. The guests vowed to rescue this art by systematically collecting Pueblo pottery, thus creating the Pueblo Pottery Fund. Deciding to collect more broadly, in 1925, they incorporated as the Indian Arts Fund. Its mission was not only to preserve Indian art, but also to inspire Native people to revive their traditions. Elizabeth and Martha White were founding members. As the collection grew, storage became a problem. In 1964, the trustees, who included Elizabeth White, decided to deed the 4,500-piece collection to SAR with the understanding that it eventually provide a secure facility to house it. Elizabeth, who also served on SAR's Board of Managers, undoubtedly played a key role in that decision. In 1978, 5 years after SAR moved onto El Delirio, President Douglas Schwartz obtained funding from former Indian Arts Fund member Perrine Dixon McCune to build the Indian Arts Research Center in honor of Marshall L. McCune, longtime SAR board member. Today, the collection numbers over 12,000 pieces. In 1986, SAR added a second vault, also funded by McCune. Heading up the hill, we come to our next site, SAR Press, known informally as the Doghouse. When the White sisters were still living in New York City, they attended the Westminster Dog Show and fell in love with the Irish Wolfhound. They decided if they ever had a big enough place, they would raise them. And in 1930, they bought a breeding pair of Irish Wolfhounds and asked their estate manager, Jack Lambert, to build them a kennel. He completed it in February 1931, just as the first litter of puppies arrived. Calling it Rathmullen after a castle in Ireland, the kennel consisted of 5 rooms, each designed to hold 2 dogs, plus a puppy and a trophy room. Lambert would later add a second-story apartment for their kennel master, Alex Scott, who they hired in 1932. A collie expert, Scott quickly got up to speed on the Irish Wolfhound, and soon their dogs were winning trophies in shows across the country. In 1934, Elizabeth decided to raise Afghans, which were even more successful. When the United States entered World War II, Elizabeth, who had volunteered as a nurse during World War I, wanted to help the war effort. In May 1942, she agreed to serve as regional director of Dogs for Defense, a nonprofit which recruited people's pets to be trained as war dogs. Elizabeth donated the use of her kennel, as well as an Afghan, and in the months that followed, 165 New Mexico dogs would be screened at El Delirio and sent to one of the Army's remount centers to be trained as sentry, scout, or messenger dogs. The recruits depicted here are headed to Front Royal, Virginia. Upon the death of her kennel manager, Alex Scott, in 1953, Elizabeth stopped showing dogs. In 1962, she and her younger sister Abby donated the building to SAR for use as an archaeology lab. Then, in 1984, it was remodeled for use by SAR Press, whose titles include numerous archaeology and Indian arts books, as well as the results of its advanced seminars. Although the dogs are long gone, their trophies remain. Heading down the road, we come to our 12th site, the Catherine McIlvaine Library, which opened in 1991. The stacks, however, are said to be on the site of their old workshop. Its collection of 10,000 books, as well as journals, are available for use by resident fellows, staff, SAR members, and others by appointment. The library also houses the school's archives, which include the White Sisters' papers. Located next to the library, our 13th site, today known as the Schwartz Seminar House, dates back to the 1920s. Once the estate manager's house, it later became a guest house. El Delirio had many distinguished guests, such as British archaeologist Max Mallowan. Invited to Santa Fe by SAR to give a lecture, he brought along his wife, Agatha Christie, or so I was told. This building has been extensively remodeled. Additional bedrooms have been added, and the kitchen expanded to address the needs of the scholars who meet here to discuss critical topics in anthropology and other fields. Meals are provided in this refurbished dining room. Despite these alterations, the facility still retains much of its original character. Our tour ends where it began, at the reception center, one of our newer buildings. This facility opened in 1999, where their swimming pool had once been. Its changing rooms incorporated into the new building. The swimming pool was one of the first amenities installed by the White Sisters for use for their guests as well as themselves, and dedicated in July 1926. It was also the site of one of their first and most memorable parties. Such was life at El Delirio. Elizabeth White died August 28, 1972, on her 94th birthday. A longtime board member, she left her estate to SAR. As we conclude our tour, I'd like to leave you with the following message. Taking a page from the White Sisters Playbook, Do Your Part to Save the World and Party On. Thank you.
Well, that was wonderful. Thank you, Lindsay, for playing that. And yeah, it's wonderful to walk through the campus that way. I'm assuming most of you have seen the campus, but maybe you haven't had such an in-depth tour. So hopefully you enjoyed the tour and walking through the buildings. That was wonderful. I want to acknowledge Jean Schomburg. She's our former employee of SAR, of membership coordinator. And she and Nancy Owen Lewis, the woman who narrated that tour, recently wrote a full nomination to the Historic Santa Fe Foundation, and the property has been awarded, has been placed on the register of properties worthy of preservation. And now we have a plaque proudly displayed in the entrance to the administration building. And I want to thank Jean and Nancy for submitting that nomination to receive that honor for the estate. So it's wonderful to have that now as part of a permanent fixture on our building. And the next part of this event is I'd like to introduce Russ and Diane Kyncl. Russ and Diane have been members of SAR since 2015, last 6 years or so. And I was making some calls this fall to check in with some of our legacy members just to find out who they were and why they included SAR in their estate plans. And I came across Russ and Diane and just had this amazing conversation with them that was so moving. And I asked if they would please come today and share their story with us as to how they came to know SAR and why they've included SAR in their estate plans. And I'm just going to hand it over to Russ and Dan. I know they have Kleenex ready because it's quite a moving story. But if you wouldn't mind, please share your story with the rest of us. It's quite moving. Thank you. You'll need to unmute yourself, Russ.
There
you go.
Darna, I think you said you live in Boulder. And our story to SAR begins just west of Boulder, probably almost 60 years ago. Darna, you can shake your head yes. I don't know how long you've lived in Boulder, but does the name Charlie Eagleplume register? Or Eagleplume's Trading Post? Okay, well, I'll just launch in. I grew up in northeastern Colorado. My dad was a Presbyterian minister, and just up the road from Highlands Church Camp, a Presbyterian church camp in Allen's Park, just west of Boulder, up in the mountains, is Eagleplume's Trading Post. And Charlie Eagleplume was a Blackfoot Indian, a Native American trader, and it's still there, a great collection of jewelry for sale and other Native American art. Charlie would mess with little kids' heads in his storytelling. But what's important to this story, and it is a bedrock part of my childhood and no time to share the details here, but he sold one of the many tribes was Zuni jewelry. And when I was a teenager, I saw a red cardinal bolo that just popped in Eagleplume's Trading Post. And I thought, boy, someday I want to own one of those. And those of you who've bought Zuni jewelry, it's not cheap. And so finally, about 20 years ago, I felt like I had a little bit of money I could burn on things like that. Charlie died in the 1990s, but I called up his store and just said, Dayton, I want to buy a red cardinal bolo. I have no idea who makes it, but there's some Native American tribe and their last name sounds Japanese. And he immediately said, well, you mean Dennis and Nancy Adaki, and they're Zuni. So anyway, I wrote a story about that and shared it. I was able to find the Adaki's address, and they were mentioned in the story. It was mainly about Charlie Eagleplume. And I sent it down to him, and that story opened a door to a relationship with the Adakis that has lasted about 20 years. And so far, Tim Adaki, that we'll get to in the story, is Dennis and Nancy's grandson. And so that's how we met Tim. He was the Adakis, helped with their caregiving in Zuni Pueblo and lived with them. And so leaping ahead, about 6 years ago, we were out in Zuni on a visit. It was between Shalako and Christmas, so mid-December. And we were out on a Pueblo. Tim at the time was with his partner, Bobby, who's a Hopi and also a potter and a weaver. And we were out on the Pueblo where they, or the ruin where the Spanish first attacked the Zuni. It's probably about 10 miles west of where the Pueblo is now. And they were collecting pottery shards for their pottery and explaining the designs, the partial designs to us. And on the way back into Zuni, Tim mentioned that he had been an art student in Santa Fe and knew about SAR, and Bobby had grown up on the Hopi Mesas and had never been to Santa Fe. And he would wanted to come to Santa Fe someday and share, the SAR collection with Bobby for the pottery they were trying to do. And we were driving back in, and just spontaneous, which is highly unusual for me. I ended up saying, maybe why don't you come back with us? We've got a 2-bedroom condo and maybe we can set something up. And this is on a Wednesday night in Zuni, south of Gallup. And so they were in their fasting period. We had to have a discussion with Nancy Adaki, the matriarch, about how we could work around, have this work. And we had a 5-hour window on Thursday morning where if we could get them to SAR, get them back to Albuquerque, they could have a cousin drive them back to the Pueblo that was going back the next day from Albuquerque without breaking their fast laws. And so we drove over. Tim called SAR Thursday morning, 9 o'clock, didn't tell you who he was, just basically said, hey, can we come over? And of course the answer was no. You're open for a tour on Friday. He hung up the phone, just crushed. He was so excited to share with Bobby. And I said, Tim, can I call back for you and just explain to them who you are? And we did that. And I forget who the staff member was, but once they understood, whoever I talked to said, look, we're really busy. We've got a bunch of anthropologists in for a symposium. It's too late to call our volunteers. This was like about 9:30. And he said, but let me see what I can do. And Lisa Poon gave them a tour. It was probably about 11 o'clock. And you guys just moved heaven and earth. And so we'd never heard of SAR, but we were able to, what would you say? Yeah, share the tour. Mm-hmm. And it just blew us away.
They let him.
Thank you. You let them handle the pots with their bare hands, and to watch them connect with that pottery that day. And that they were so excited. Tim was explaining to us the fragments that we'd seen the day before. He was showing us the entire designs, from hundreds of years ago. And it was unbelievably special. And so anyway, what do we got to get to? Oh,
well, they applied for this scholarship.
yeah, together,
Mm-hmm.
and they didn't get it. And they since had broken up, another story. And then Tim, when Tim had I don't know what you call it, but the Native American, the artist in residence, is that the right term? It was so exciting to see his development as an artist. And he wanted us to come down when he did his presentation, and we did. And boy, he worked hard on that. And it was really amazing to see his progress as an artist in that time. And it's so unfortunate that he just a few months after is when they started to have trouble that ended up being diagnosed as the cancer that took him last September. But, just that tour. I mean, you had us at that tour. And
Okay.
yeah, that's it for me. Anyway, we got to talk about, get to bring it home. Thank you. Diane's here to keep me on track. In our giving, SAR is one of 3 charities that we support in our estate planning. And the others don't matter for this talk. We look for heart, and obviously our hearts are connected. And to SAR, just through what you did for Tim, and leverage. And I think, and we've given an unrestricted gift. We've used our IRAs just to keep it simple. And I know Dan will have some thoughts about that. But it's it's extraordinary the impact that you have and the leverage of just think of the sustaining of the cultures, helping these individuals accelerate, connecting them back to their own heritages and their own history. And we saw both the Zuni and the Hopi side personally, you know, with that tour with Tim and you know, so that's I guess that's it. We can answer any other questions people have after, but
this gift
yeah.
this gift is also very much to honor our friend Tim and to support what you are doing and to support the next artist, the next Tim that comes along.
Yeah. So that's the Reader's Digest version. I'm at 9 minutes. I'll be quiet.
Oh, thank you so much, Russ and Dan. That's so moving. I was wondering if Lindsay could just give me screen share for a second. I've got a picture of Tim. When Tom and Jill Udall came to visit the Indian Arts Research Center with our board chair there, Joe Colvin and Michael, and there's Tim with the pieces that he created while he was at the studio. So I just wanted to give you that image of Tim and give maybe a minute of silence to remember him. And you see the pot on the right there that Senator Udall's holding he was using the pot that you saw in the video, one of the first pots, the IAF1. He was using that Zuni pot as a example, as a model for his work at the studio. So he was really working on revitalizing this old tradition of Zuni pottery making. It was very, very, very special project that he did. Anyways. Well, thank you.
Michael, we can't
hear you.
Mike,
Did we just lose your microphone, Michael?
He lost his microphone.
There he is.
Yes, I can go ahead and introduce Dan. Well, why don't I go ahead and introduce Dan Merians? Looks like Michael's having technical difficulty. Dan has been an SAR member for the last, 4 or 5 years as well. And I knew Dan from when our kids were together at school at Santa Fe Prep. So it's great to have you here with us, Dan, today. And he's with UBS Wealth Management, UBS Financial Services. He's been a financial advisor since 1997. And his primary focus is on portfolio management and financial planning. He's got a BA from Stanford University and an MBA and Masters of Public Health from the University of California, Berkeley. Moved to New Mexico in 1991 to conduct medical research as an epidemiologist of the Department of Health. And but then he returned to the private sector as a financial advisor with Merrill Lynch in 1997. And it's been with Smith Barney, and which was purchased by Morgan Stanley, and he's been the Senior Vice President and Portfolio Management Director until he moved to UBS in 2015. So with that, he's very well qualified to talk with us about wealth management, financial planning. Thank you, Dan, for being with us.
Thank you, Laura, for the introduction, and thank you for having me. This is one of the things that I really enjoy the most out of the many activities I do as a financial advisor. Charitable donations and gifting is really rewarding and interesting. You get to know people and what's important to them, their values, how they want to align those values with the world they're living in. And Russ and Diane, I thought your story was really, really touching. And I'm sorry about Tim. It sounded like he was a really special person.
Yeah, he was.
Yeah. So one of the things you have to realize is this is a very broad area. It has a lot of different strategies and vehicles that you can use to accomplish your goals. And I'm just going to hit on a few highlights. Most people here are charitably inclined and support SAR, which is great. And you can do it, of course, making direct gifts during your lifetime. But with a little planning, you can do some really powerful things. And that could include creating lifetime income for yourself and your loved ones. You could also avoid some income taxes, capital gain taxes, estate taxes. These are issues that for many people, especially, if you've been a business owner, you worked hard your whole life, and then you watch the government claim half of it on your death. And while the tax laws have been favorable for many years, they're likely to go up during the Biden-Harris administration. And some of that's just a practical necessity. We're still recovering from COVID. Unfortunately, there is a light at the end of the tunnel, and it is a lot closer than it was 6 months ago. But it's creating a lot of debt that's going to challenge my children, and hopefully I live long enough to see my grandchildren, and cause inflation and other things. So without getting too off track, I would just encourage you to talk to your financial advisors, financial planners. You also want to involve your CPAs and lawyers, especially those that do estate planning, because some of these tools are very simple and easy, and others are pretty complicated, and they can then be combined in ways to really help those organizations that are near and dear to your heart, like SAR. I would start out by saying one thing you can do, like Russ and Diane, is specify in your will that your IRA is going to go to a charity. And it doesn't have to be all of it. You're totally in control of what you choose to do. But it's a very powerful strategy in that the charity isn't subject to income tax. And if you pull money out of your IRA, you're going to pay taxes. So if you don't use the entire IRA in your lifetimes, I think, Russ, you said that your IRAs would go to each other, and then whatever left would go to a charity. In fact, I think you said there were 3 charities, SAR being the most important, of course. But you can also do it while you're alive. If you get to be 70 and a half, and the laws just recently changed because of COVID, at 72, you have to start taking out a required minimum distribution. Rather than taking it out and paying taxes and then giving it to a charity, you can have it go directly to the charity and avoid taxes on the entire amount. So effectively, your gift is anywhere from 60 to 80% more productive, because the taxes stay with the charity. So that's a really helpful thing to do. And I'm going to just say that we do have some pieces within UBS, some third-party sources, that if you're interested, you could contact Lindsay or Laura, and they can connect you to me. We're going to have a follow-up email, I guess, Laura, and I'll put my contact information in there, and you can contact me or a person on my team. And if you have real specific questions, I'm happy to talk to you as a courtesy. If you just want a short white paper, we'll send those to you as well. So the other things that you might consider doing, and I know for many of you, art is near and dear to your heart. Art and real estate tend to be things that appreciate and keep up with inflation. Again, you could sell a painting or a piece of property, but you might want to create a charitable remainder trust. And this, again, you would do with a lawyer. I had the good fortune of growing up in a family outside of New York City, and every other weekend we were going to museums and galleries. My parents sort of got the art bug and collected contemporary art. And at one point, my mom said, I need more income. And she gave a Marsden Hartley to a charitable remainder trust. The trust then sold it. Because it's a charity, no taxes were paid. And then it generated 5-6% income on that value for her entire lifetime. And ultimately, the charity got the residual, the remainder. And I suspect some of you know these different strategies. Another one that I like, because it's referred to as the Jackie Kennedy Onassis Trust. It's a Lee trust, where she didn't need the money in her lifetime, but she did want to take care of her children and her grandchildren. So she gave the income from the assets to this trust. The income went to the charity for, I think it was 20 years, but you can construct it in a way that makes the most sense for you and your family. And then ultimately the remainder, the corpus of the trust, went back to her family. So the real key is to think about what's important to you, what are your values, and then work with your trusted advisors to explore the best strategies and vehicles. If anybody here is a business owner, there's some rules that are really nuanced, and you want to, again, work with an attorney, but you can give away part of the business, shares of the business, and then when you sell it, assuming you put your entire life into this, and I have a client who's in his 70s in California, is about to sell a company. The portion that he gives away to a family trust, sometimes called a private foundation, those give you a big tax deduction. And again, you can have a fair amount of control over how those monies are used to support things that are important to you and your family. Another strategy that's worth considering, it's relatively new, is a donor advised fund. And that's something you can do to give away gifts currently while you're alive, or it can be used later on in your estate. Typically, it's used with liquid security stocks and bonds, but it can be used with real estate as well. And the idea is you can put money in and you don't have to distribute it that year. You could choose to distribute it over 2 years, 5 years, 10 years. And a donor advised fund, sometimes called a DAF, has become more important since 2017, when former President Trump changed the tax laws. Many of us would do Schedule A on our taxes. I'm not a CPA. I'm not supposed to give tax advice, but having done this for over 23 years, I can tell you there's a lot of things that people can take advantage of. And now that you aren't going to be able to deduct perhaps gifts to charities, if your gift isn't above $12,000 a person or $24,000 a family, a couple, then what we sometimes suggest is make your donations every 2 or 3 or 4 years in a much larger amount. So you exceed that threshold. It goes into the donor advised fund. You could give it all the way that year if you wanted to, but you can also spread it out and then potentially have the tax savings that we used to have. Before 2017, I think each person could deduct about $6,500. And now with inflation, it's about $12,400. So that's probably as numbers oriented and technical as I'm gonna get. Just know that donor advised fund is a great way to gift highly appreciated assets and then use that, whether it's in 1 year or over multiple years, to support organizations that are doing things that are important to you, like education and art and things for the environment. So that's something a lot of people are looking at. And a little bit off subject, I'll also say, don't forget perhaps the most important charities, which might be your children or grandchildren. And there is something called the 529 plan, named after the part of the IRS code. And having 3 boys, the youngest is now a junior in college, I can tell you there are lots of ways to save for college, get tax deductions, protect yourself from creditors. And in New Mexico, if you happen to file a New Mexico return, which I suspect most of us do, sorry for you up in Colorado, but you actually get a deduction on your New Mexico tax return. So, you know, if you put in $10,000, you'd save $500. It's not a lot. If you do that every year for the years that your kids or grandkids are growing up, it grows tax-free, and you get a tax deduction from New Mexico along the way. So I think I forgot to check my timer. How am I doing, Laura?
We're good. We wanted to leave some time for questions for Dan, or any questions for Russ and Diane. And Michael, do you have your audio back? Okay.
Can you hear me now? Okay.
Yeah.
Okay. Thank you.
So does anybody have any questions for Dan, or comments or experiences that you've had with estate planning you'd like to share?
Laura, do you want me to say something?
Go ahead. Sure, Elizabeth.
Yeah. Yes, I am a retired CPA, and so, you know, and a former charitable gift planner at several nonprofits in the Chicago area. So personally, I've been very interested in seeing how can my husband and I use these tools. And we just, I won't go into the details of this, but we just set it up so that one of my IRA accounts, I wanted to it to go to SAR, but I also wanted to benefit my stepsons. And when I die, that's going to fund an annuity that'll pay them income. And then when they die, everything that's left will go to SAR. So it was a wonderful way to help SAR ultimately, and also those kids. And if we had left that money outright to them in the IRA, they would have had to pay tax on it when it came out. And this way it transfers tax-free to the charitable gift annuity. So it was so exciting, Laura, wasn't it? All the planning for that to make that work. It's kind of a new idea. So if anybody is curious about that, I'll be glad to share how we did it.
Well, it's a very creative way to manage that. Thank you, Elizabeth. And Elizabeth does generously give from her as a required minimum distribution to SAR every year. It's a nice way many of our donors actually give. They're able to give more because otherwise they'd be taxed on that income. So it's a nice way to roll it over to a charity, and the charity benefits and the donor doesn't have to pay tax on that distribution. So that's a nice way. Does anybody have any other experiences they want to share? Helen, do you want to say anything? You're experienced in the estate charitable plan giving. I don't want to put you on the spot, but I mean, one of the easiest ways to include a charity is just to write us into your will a percentage of your estate or a dollar amount. I think they're saying a percentage is better. I don't know. What are you advising people, Dan, these days?
Well, values go up and down. If it's a percentage, that stays consistent. If you use dollar amounts, then you have to periodically review your documents and perhaps modify them. Both can work though. And also the gifting that you do from your IRA or from your estate can often be leveraged because, again, you get into the nuance of it, and a CPA can help you with this. There are limits on how much you can give away as a percent of your adjusted gross income. In some cases it's 30%, in some cases it's 50%. And if it's consistent with the organization's mission, like in the case of SAR, if you're giving away art, you're able to give away more. You don't lose it if you exceed that threshold, but you have to carry it forward for up to 5 years. So there's a lot there. The main thing is to think about what's important to you and try to articulate your values with people who can help you translate that into a plan.
Helen, do you want to say anything about that in terms of values and giving?
Well, I was just going to agree. It is so important, and to periodically review what you've done and to make those decisions and to work with trusted advisors who have the expertise to help you accomplish it. It's such a good feeling, and hearing your story, it's remarkable, and that's ultimately what you want to have come out of it, is that you feel good about what you've done and it's something that's close to your heart and agrees with your values.
Probably one of the most meaningful gifts I think you could give, isn't it? To know that will have a lasting impact on an organization you care about.
It's amazing to hear Michael say, I think it was him, when SAR started out, they only had an endowment of $39,000. That doesn't go very far today. And to have something that's growing and providing income for operations and expansion, and really keep the organization through good times and hard times is really important.
And many of the legacy gifts that we do receive, we haven't, some of them are just a surprise. We didn't know that the donor had us included in their will. So if you have, it's good for us to know, so we're not surprised, and so that we can honor your intentions. And as Dan said, it helps us build, and Michael, it helps us build our endowment, which is really, provides that sustainable support into the future. But you can also designate it if you like to some specific program or not, or just trust the organization to use it as best needed. So there are many different ways to structure. We do have a society. It's called the El Delirio Legacy Society, appropriately named. And in the follow-up email, we'll send you a link with some more information about that society, that circle of giving. If you'd like to be a member of that, we'd welcome you to consider that. Or if you'd like to have a conversation with one of us more about that in detail, or talk with Dan or Elizabeth, we have some or Helen, we have people who are experienced in these kinds of gifts. So we're open to having those conversations with you if you'd like. Any final words or?
Well, if you can hear me, first let me apologize for my audio problems. One of those mysteries of Zoom. Even more terrifying, I was actually hosting an event and the incoming audio stopped. And I was, fortunately, the two panelists went on carrying on a conversation, but I was sweating bullets wondering what would happen when they looked at me for my next question. Fortunately, my audio came back on, but it was the longest 45 seconds of my life. Anyway, thanks so much to the Kyncls and to Dan Merians, who I really appreciate. I mean, not only is his firm a sponsor, but I enjoy seeing him at our public events, and I look forward to seeing him and many of you when we're back to public lectures, which we will do as soon as circumstances allow. But thanks for joining us, and just stay tuned for what we're going to be offering in the coming weeks. We've got some online events, and as I said, we'll be easing into in-person events certainly by the fall. And Indian Arts is on a somewhat slower schedule because they have they have these unique vaults, and so air circulation is controlled and to some extent filtered, but still presents more of a risk mitigation issue from the point of view of staff. So, but we're pretty confident they'll be able to do smaller tours, certainly by August, and I think get back to a more normal schedule by the fall. So I hope to see most of you then.
Sounds great. Looking forward to it.
Thanks to everybody.
Hey,
Have a good
thank you.